If I don't walk into that room by 10, the deal dies, and so does this company. Ava Marlowe's heels struck the rooftop helipad like gunshots, sharp, final, unapologetic. The sky above Aurora Falls was still tinted with dawn, but her day had already begun 4 hours ago with a triple espresso and a spreadsheet full of numbers that determined her future. She didn't have time for failure. Not today. Behind her, 2 assistants scrambled phones to ears, voices climbing in panic. A sleek black helicopter waited on the pad, fully fueled, rotors still, ready to fly. But the pilot wasn't coming. He fractured his wrist. "Car accident on the bridge," Jordan said, breathlessly lowering his phone. Ava didn't flinch. She kept her gaze fixed on the skyline where the towers of downtown glinted like steel promises. "Call the backup," she ordered. Out of town, Mary said, eyes wide, and the charter company says their earliest availability is noon. "Noon is a funeral," Ava snapped. "For this deal. For this company. For every damn person who depends on a paycheck here." The wind picked up, sending a sharp breeze through her tailored coat. She crossed her arms. Underneath the confident posture was a firestorm of rage and calculation. Helix Sky, the trillion-dollar tech conglomerate, was waiting across the city with a pen and a non-disclosure the size of a phone book. A face-to-face was non-negotiable. No video calls, no delays, no excuses. Ava had closed 7-figure contracts from an iPad while hiking the Andes. But this deal, this was different. 9 figures, global reach, the future of Silverline Dynamics. She clenched her jaw. "I'll drive," Jordan offered meekly. "We'll hit gridlock by Midtown and you know it," Ava snapped. "It's rush hour and there's construction on the West Loop." Silence fell over the rooftop, thick as smoke. And then, "I can fly it." The voice was low, even, calm in a way that cut through the static like a blade. They turned. From the rooftop stairwell emerged a man in a gray janitor's uniform, mop in one hand, a worn utility bucket in the other. He looked out of place among the suits and tension like a ghost who'd wandered onto the set of a war room. Jack Brennan. He'd been there longer than most. Quiet, invisible by design. Never late, never in the way. Most employees didn't know his name. But now he was the only one speaking. Jordan blinked. "Wait," what Jack set the bucket down. "I said I can fly it." Marianne laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. You mop floors, Brennan. That's a Bell 407. Jack nodded once. "I know." Ava stepped forward, appraising him with sharp, cold eyes. "And you think this is a joke, that you can just hop into a $7 million machine and play pilot because what you watched, a YouTube tutorial?" "No, ma'am," he said, steady. "I've logged time in one. More than a few hours." She studied him. There was no smirk, no bluff. Just stillness. His face was unreadable, but his posture was wrong for a janitor. Too square, too calm. Like he'd stared down worse situations than a rooftop full of doubters. Still, it was absurd. It had to be. "Fly this bird," Ava said slowly, voice laced with dry amusement, "and I'll marry you." Marianne gasped. Jordan choked. Even Jack's expression flickered just slightly but then returned to neutral. He nodded. "All right." And with that, he walked past her toward the helicopter. Ava stood frozen. She hadn't meant it. It was a sarcastic flare tossed into the wind out of sheer frustration. But the janitor had just accepted it like a military order. "What is happening right now?" Jordan whispered. Ava didn't answer. Her eyes followed Jack. He moved like someone who'd done this before. Not hesitant, not showy, just deliberate. When he reached the aircraft, he didn't gawk at the controls or fumble with the handle. He opened the door with practiced ease, climbed in, fastened the harness, and started the pre-check as if he'd been born in that cockpit. The rotors hummed to life. Ava's heart skipped. Wind from the blades rippled through her coat as she walked almost against her will toward the helicopter. Ma'am Marianne shouted above the rising thrum, "You can't seriously be considering this." "I don't have time to consider anything," Ava replied, already climbing in. She pulled on the headset. The noise muted. The world sharpened. Jack's voice came through the comms crystal clear. "Ready." She looked over. His hands were on the controls. Confident. Sure. And for the first time in a very, very long time. Ava Marlowe didn't have an answer, but her pride wouldn't let her show it. "Take us there," she said, "and don't crash. I hate being late." Jack didn't smile, he just nodded. The helicopter lifted off smooth as silk. Below them, Aurora Falls shrank into a miniature model of itself, roads like veins, buildings like teeth. The sun crested the edge of the Cascade Range, casting golden light across the glass towers. Ava kept glancing sideways. Jack wasn't just flying. He was commanding the aircraft. Tiny adjustments, smooth banking, threading between air corridors with confidence no simulator could fake. She gripped the seat. Who was this man? The headset crackled. "You okay?" She blinked. "Yeah." A beat of silence. "I don't make jokes in cockpits." Ava turned to him. He was looking straight ahead, focused. "I didn't think you did." Another pause. Good. The rest of the flight was silent, but Ava's mind was racing faster than the blades above them. They touched down at Helix Sky HQ with a kiss of the rubber on landing pad metal. No jolt, no rattle, just smooth, flawless contact. Jack shut down the engine, unclipped his harness, opened the door. Ava didn't move. Her pulse was still drumming in her ears. She looked at him. "You said you've logged hours in one of these?" He nodded, where Jack met her eyes. Before, that was all. Before he turned and walked back toward the helicopter mop still waiting in the corner of the rooftop. The elevator ride down was silent. Ava stood alone, arms crossed tightly over her chest, watching the floors tick by with military precision. Somewhere below the signing ceremony was already in motion. Name tags arranged bottled water sweating on linen-covered tables, executives waiting with stiff handshakes and even stiffer expectations. And yet her thoughts were still spinning above the skyline. Who the hell is Jack Brennan? She hadn't spoken a word after the landing, had barely looked at him. She didn't know how to. He hadn't demanded praise, hadn't waited for applause. The moment the blades stopped, he stepped back into shadow, into silence, like a ghost evaporating after the job was done. But ghosts didn't fly like that. Ghosts didn't cradle a multi-million-dollar helicopter like it was a violin. Her fingers twitched at her side. They still remembered the steadiness of that flight, the way he adjusted pitch without overcorrecting, the way he skimmed the air corridors like a man who'd done it blindfolded before. That wasn't luck. That was mastery. And mastery always had a story. The conference room at Helix Sky was filled with synthetic smiles and hard stares. The signing itself went flawlessly. Ava never faltered in public, never let emotion crack her armor. She was crisp, controlled, convincing. But even as she clicked her Mont Blanc pen across the dotted line, part of her was still in the sky. 3 hours later, back in her office, Ava sat at her desk staring at the city beyond the glass. Her signature coat was draped over the back of the chair. Her heels had been kicked off without ceremony. She wasn't sure why she hadn't gone home yet. The deal was done. But something else had just begun, and it wouldn't leave her alone. She pulled up the internal directory. Jack Brennan, Department Facilities Position, Janitorial Staff, Executive Wing Start Date. 8 months ago, resume not provided. References, none listed. Background check, basic, criminal screen, clean. That was it. No job history, no military service, no pilot license on file. She leaned back, tapping her pen against her bottom lip. Something wasn't adding up. You don't fly like that by accident. You don't bank over power lines and crosswinds unless you've done it 100 times before with lives in the back seat. Ava opened her phone and scrolled to her contact list. She paused on one name, Trent Maxwell, retired Major U.S. Army Aviation. Old friend, occasional consultant. She hadn't called Trent in years, but some questions were worth reawakening. By dusk, Ava was still in the building. The office had thinned out empty desks glowing faintly under motion sensors. She stood by the break room window sipping lukewarm tea when she saw them. Down the corridor near the vending machines, Jack was crouched beside a small boy, his son, she assumed. Same serious eyes, same posture, same quiet presence. The boy couldn't have been older than 6. He was showing Jack a drawing scribbled in crayon held proudly with 2 hands. It was a helicopter, crooked but full of joy with stick-figure people inside and what looked like stars across the sky. Jack listened intently, nodding as the boy explained each detail. Then he ruffled the boy's hair and helped him up with a gentleness that didn't match his size. Ava watched them for a moment longer, then turned away. She didn't know why, but her chest ached. Later that night, her phone buzzed. It was Trent. She answered before the second ring. "You're still awake," he said, no preamble. "I need a favor," she said. "Let me guess. You found someone in your building who flies better than half the boys I trained, but his record says he's a janitor." She paused. "How did you wouldn't call me after 5 years unless something was off script." "I know you, Ava." She exhaled. "His name is Jack Brennan." There was a long silence. Then Trent said slowly, "Now that's a name I haven't heard in a long time." Her pulse jumped. "What do you know? I'll run it through the secure system, but if it's who I think it is—" He let out a low whistle. "You just had a war hero fly you across the city." Her throat tightened. "I'll call you back in an hour," Trent added. "You'll want to be sitting down." Ava didn't sit. She paced, from window to desk to door and back again. She couldn't shake the image of Jack, mop in one hand, crayon drawing in the other. How many things had she missed walking past him every day? How many people like him had slipped through the cracks because they weren't wrapped in titles and polished resumes? An hour later, her phone lit up again. Trent didn't wait. Captain Jack Brennan, Army Aviation Corps, call sign Phantom. Ava didn't breathe. 2 tours in Afghanistan. Flew Blackhawks in some of the worst combat zones. There's a citation here for extracting a 6-man team under enemy fire. Got everyone out alive. Honorable discharge 3 years ago. "What happened?" Ava asked, voice barely audible. "He left after his wife died. Car crash back home. She was 8 months pregnant. Baby survived barely. Brennan got back just in time to name him. The tea in her hand had gone cold. I had no idea," she whispered. "Most people don't. He disappeared. No interviews, no speaking circuits, no book deals. Just gone. Why, I imagine he needed to disappear. Some guys come back wanting medals. Others just want peace." Ava leaned her forehead against the window. "And you're sure it's him? You saw him fly, didn't you?" She closed her eyes. The flight replayed in her head with vivid precision. The silence, the smoothness, the certainty. "Yes," she said softly. "I did." She stayed late that night. She didn't know what she was looking for, answers maybe, or just the quiet comfort of being alone in a space she usually ruled. As she walked past the break room again, she saw it. A napkin, left behind on the table weighted by a half-eaten apple, and on it in bright blue crayon a new drawing. This time the helicopter was surrounded by stars, and next to it 2 stick figures, one tall, one with long hair, both flying together. The next morning, Ava Marlowe sat at her desk staring at the screen, but she wasn't reading. The Helix Sky contract sat open in front of her 9 figures lined up like gleaming dominoes. One signature had launched Silverline Dynamics into an entirely new orbit. Her board should be celebrating. Investors should be pouring champagne. And yet all she could think about was the janitor who flew like a ghost out of legend and disappeared like he never existed. The image haunted her. Not just the flight, but the man. The silence. The gravity in his eyes. The quiet resignation of someone who had once carried lives in the air and now pushed mop buckets through empty hallways. Jack Brennan. She said the name aloud in her mind. It sounded like a secret that shouldn't be whispered, and now she was holding that secret in her hands. She pulled open his file again, hoping stupidly that something had changed overnight. Nothing had. Just the same sparse, impersonal entry: Jack Brennan Department Facilities, Maintenance, Start Date, 8 months ago, Supervisor Carlos Rivas. Status active, medical cleared resume, not submitted, emergency contact, Micah. Brennan, son Micah, the boy with the crayon drawings. Ava exhaled and picked up her phone. She dialed the extension of the facilities director. Carlos, this is Ava. There was an audible gulp on the other end. Good morning, Miss Marlowe. I want to talk to you about one of your team members. Jack Brennan. A pause. Then Carlos said, Sure. Did something happen? Yes, she said simply. He flew my helicopter. Silence. Then slowly, I didn't know he could do that. Neither did I. An hour later, Ava stood outside the simulation room on the 3rd floor, one of the company's most private spaces used by senior engineers and pilots in training. She remembered seeing Jack here once, late at night, cleaning, just passing through. Except he hadn't just passed through. She'd seen it from the glass wall outside her office. He'd stopped, looked at the rotor simulation console, one of the older ones that had been giving them trouble for weeks. She'd watched as he placed his mop aside, opened the access panel, and fixed the mechanism in under 10 minutes. No manual. No hesitation. She hadn't said a word, because back then it was easier to assume a coincidence than to believe someone had been hiding in plain sight. Now she wasn't so sure. Downstairs, she found herself standing at the edge of the cafeteria, unsure why she'd come. She rarely ate here. Her schedule didn't allow for it, and her presence made people uncomfortable. But today she scanned the room like a hawk. And there he was. Back corner. Gray uniform. A peanut butter sandwich wrapped in wax paper. Micah sat beside him, swinging his legs off the bench, eyes focused on a little sketch pad resting on his knees. They looked like a portrait ripped out of a quieter world. Father and son. Ordinary. Invisible. Ava approached without thinking. Jack noticed her before she even spoke. His posture straightened slightly, not in fear, but in awareness. Miss Marlowe, he said, folding his sandwich back into the paper. Micah looked up, wide-eyed. Jack, she said, may I join you? He hesitated, then nodded. Of course. She sat down across from them. The seat was cold. Her heart beat faster than she expected. Micah stared at her, then glanced at his dad. Jack gave a small nod. Micah returned to his drawing. Ava cleared her throat. I've been looking at your file. Jack raised an eyebrow but didn't speak. There's not much in it, she continued. No resume. No record of any license. No mention of military service. I didn't submit one, he said. Why not? He met her eyes. Because I didn't want to be found. That silence settled between them like fog. Ava leaned forward. You flew, like someone who's done it thousands of times. Trent Maxwell confirmed it. You were Captain Brennan. Call sign, Phantom. Jack didn't flinch, but he did exhale, slow and tired. I figured Trent would remember me, he said quietly. Ava lowered her voice. Why are you mopping floors, Jack? With your history, you could be flying for any agency in the country. He looked at Micah. The boy was humming quietly, still coloring, unaware that his father was unraveling a truth in front of a CEO. I needed a job that didn't ask questions, Jack said. One that let me bring my son to work when school lets out early. One that lets me leave at 5 and still tuck him in at night. Ava's throat tightened. She looked at Micah again. Blonde curls. Crayon-streaked hands. There was an innocence there she hadn't seen in her world for years. Jack continued, I didn't stop flying because I lost the skill. I stopped because the sky doesn't forgive hesitation. And for a long time I couldn't trust myself not to flinch. Ava blinked. That day she said you didn't flinch. No, Jack agreed. But you did. She froze. Not from offense. From recognition. He wasn't wrong. For the first time in years, someone had looked at her and said something true, not as a subordinate, not as a rival, but as a human being. Ava looked down. "I made a joke," she said. "Fly this bird, and I'll marry you." "I didn't mean it," I know, Jack said. "But I meant the part where I trusted you," she added. That part wasn't a joke. Micah suddenly piped up, looking at her with bright eyes. "I drew you." Ava blinked. "You did?" Micah proudly turned his sketch pad around. On the page was another helicopter. This time it had 3 stick figures. One tall, one small, and one with long dark hair. All 3 were smiling inside the cockpit. Ava felt something sharp twist in her chest. Jack gave a soft chuckle and placed a hand on Micah's shoulder. "He doesn't draw people he doesn't like." "I'm honored," Ava said. She looked at Jack and her voice lowered again. "I think you spent too long hiding from your own story." Jack didn't speak for a moment. Then he asked, "And what if the story isn't finished?" Then maybe she said softly, "It's time you started writing the next chapter. Phantom 1, you've got a decision to make. Your co-pilot's bleeding out. Orders are to complete the evac. What's it going to be?" The voice crackled through the comms, thick with urgency and static. Sandstorm haze blurred the cockpit glass. The desert below boiled in 110-degree heat, and in the back of the Black Hawk 6 men waited with desperate eyes. One of them, Lieutenant Mora, was already unconscious, blood soaking his fatigues. And in the co-pilot's seat, Sergeant Colin Bishop gritted his teeth through a shattered femur and a chest wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. Captain Jack Brennan's hands were steady on the stick, but his voice was a whisper. Copy command. The only sound in the cabin was breathing labored, shallow human. Jack looked left. Bishop was pale-slipping. The man had been his co-pilot for 2 years. Jack knew his laugh, his coffee order, the way he always hummed Johnny Cash before takeoff. He also knew Bishop had a baby girl back in Tulsa who had just learned to say, "da-da." Jack's grip tightened. He looked to the rear compartment where Private Salazar was holding pressure on Mora's wound eyes wide and pleading. The rest of the team was silent. Not because they weren't scared, but because they trusted him to get them home. Jack Bishop rasped, barely audible, "You have to go. I'm not leaving you." Bishop managed a half-smile. "This is the job, brother." Jack pressed his headset again. "Phantom 1, rerouting. I'm bringing them all out. I don't care what the book says." The storm outside roared louder as he pushed the throttle and took them higher. And faster. And somehow through the fire, through the smoke, through the madness, they made it out. The debriefing afterward was clinical. "You violated a direct evac route. You could have lost the aircraft." "I didn't." "You disobeyed mission protocol." "I brought them all back." "Bishop's in a wheelchair now. He's alive. They gave him the medal anyway. The Silver Star, his 3rd. Jack never wore it. 6 months later, he stood on a tarmac in Virginia, holding a folded flag in one hand and a death certificate in the other. Single-car accident, they said. Rain. A sharp curve. No other vehicles involved. Sarah Brennan, 32 years old, 8 months pregnant. She died on impact. Her last voicemail came 12 hours before. Jack still remembered every word. "I'm so excited to meet him, Jack. Micah kicks when I play that song you like. He already loves you. Come home safe, okay. We need you." By the time he landed, she was gone. Micah had survived barely. Born at 32 weeks, underweight, breathing with machines. Jack sat beside the incubator for 3 nights straight, hands pressed against the glass, whispering promises he didn't know how to keep. "I'm here, buddy," he murmured. "You're not alone. You've got me now. Just hang on." Micah did. So Jack did too. He left the military 1 month later. No ceremony, no farewell party, no last flight. He didn't tell anyone. He just disappeared. 8 months ago. Aurora Falls. The job posting didn't ask for a resume. Just a background check and willingness to do night shifts. That suited Jack just fine. He didn't want to be noticed. He didn't need recognition. He needed two things: a clean start and a way to bring his son to work when childcare failed. So he became the janitor, and he did it well. Floors sparkled, trash never overflowed, faucets didn't leak. Nobody questioned him, and he didn't give them a reason to. Until the day he heard Ava Marlowe's voice cut through a rooftop like a blade, and something old stirred in his chest. A challenge, a dare, a ghost of the man he used to be. "Fly this bird, and I'll marry you." And so he did, because for once the sky didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like home. Back in the present, Jack stood in the dim light of the company's maintenance bay. The building had gone quiet for the night. Micah was sleeping in the corner on a folded blanket, his small chest rising and falling steadily. Jack leaned against the tool rack, arms crossed. He hadn't flown since that morning with Ava. And now the world was stirring again. People were looking. He didn't like it, but what bothered him more was the way she looked at him. Not with fear, not with pity, but with belief. And belief was more dangerous than memory, because it asked you to become something again, to rise again. And Jack wasn't sure if he was ready to leave the shadows. The next day, Ava passed him in the hallway. He was polishing the glass walls outside the simulation room. She paused. "You flew with hands that didn't shake," she said. Jack looked up. It was muscle memory. "No," she replied. It was instinct, skill, purpose. Jack didn't answer, but Ava stepped closer, lowered her voice. "I don't know why you stopped flying, Jack, but I know the sky doesn't care about medals. It only cares about whether you belong up there." He met her eyes, quiet, guarded, then said softly, "And what if I don't anymore?" She didn't blink. "Then why did you take off like you'd never left?" Jack didn't have an answer. So he said nothing, but in his chest something shifted. Something long buried began to breathe. That night, as he tucked Micah into the cot in the back room of the janitor's closet, the boy yawned and whispered, "Daddy." "Yeah, Bud, did you fly again today?" Jack smiled faintly. "Not today." Micah curled under the blanket. "You should. You fly better than anyone." Jack knelt beside him. "Why do you think that?" he asked gently. Micah opened sleepy eyes. "Because you never crash." Jack's throat tightened. He kissed his son's forehead. "Sleep tight, Captain," he whispered. Then he turned off the light and stood in the dark a little longer, remembering a time when flying felt like freedom, and wondering if it still could. It started with a drawing taped to the glass. Ava was walking through the third-floor corridor when she saw it, slightly crooked, stuck with a piece of red electrical tape to the outside of her private office wall. The sketch was made with crayon on white printer paper creases still visible from being folded. A helicopter hovered in the sky, blocky and bright, with crooked rotors and clouds that looked more like cotton balls. Inside the cockpit were 3 stick figures, one tall, one small, one with a ponytail. Underneath, in blocky 6-year-old handwriting, "Fly together forever." Ava stopped cold. She looked around. The hallway was empty, but she knew exactly who had left it. That evening she waited longer than usual before heading home. She sat in her glass office with the lights dimmed, sipping lukewarm coffee, listening to the silence of a building that had mostly shut down for the night. She didn't know why she stayed. Maybe it was the weight of the contract. Maybe it was the board's looming scrutiny. Or maybe it was the feeling she hadn't had in years. Connection. It wasn't to investors or numbers or shareholders. It was to something simpler, something quieter, to a boy with crayons, to a man with a ghost inside. From her window she watched the janitorial wing begin its quiet rhythm. Mops sliding, bins wheeled, lights flickering off one by one. And then there he was, Jack Brennan, in uniform, carrying a worn backpack in one hand and a folded blanket in the other. Micah followed behind him, dragging his feet in sleepy defiance, a stuffed blue airplane tucked under one arm. They moved like a ritual, invisible to everyone, except her. Ava stepped out of her office and followed the hallway down to the small break room tucked behind the east stairwell. Jack was there heating up a container of soup in the microwave. Micah sat on the floor beside a vending machine, sketching intently with a set of crayons and a travel notepad on his lap. Jack didn't notice her until she spoke. "I saw your son's artwork," Ava said. He turned, blinked, then offered a quiet nod. "He's been on a helicopter kick lately." Can't imagine why she said dryly. Jack gave the faintest smile. She took a step closer. "He's good. For his age. His attention to detail. The tail rotors, the panel windows. He's not just drawing. He's remembering. He doesn't forget what matters," Jack said softly. "Never has." Micah looked up, then grinned and waved. "Hi, Miss Ava. Hi, Captain Micah." She replied with a small smile. The boy held up his drawing, proud. "This one's for you." Ava knelt to accept it. This one was different. It showed the same helicopter but on the ground. The stick figures were standing beside it. One was handing something to the other. A ring. Her chest tightened. Micah beamed. "That's you saying yes." Jack coughed. Ava looked up at him. His ears were flushed red. She bit back a smile. "Your son has quite the imagination. He gets it from his mom," Jack said, suddenly quieter. Micah had gone back to coloring, humming a soft tune. Ava stood and moved closer to Jack, voice low. "You never talk about her." Jack looked at the microwave. The soup had finished beeping, but he didn't move. She was the glue, he said. Held the house together while I flew halfway across the world. She left me voicemails at 2 a.m. because she knew I couldn't sleep. She bought me coffee in bulk because I hated every kind on base, and she named Micah before I got home because she thought I wouldn't make it. Ava swallowed hard. "She sounds like someone I would have liked." "She would have terrified you," Jack said, a smile tugging at his mouth. "She didn't care about status. Would have told you straight to your face if you were being cold." "I probably deserved it," Ava murmured. Jack glanced at her. "You didn't flinch in the sky, but you flinch when people get too close. That's not cold. That's pain you don't talk about." His words hit like a stone thrown through a glass house. She looked away. "I was engaged once," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Before Silverline. Before the boardroom. He said he couldn't live in my shadow, that my success made him feel small." Jack frowned. He said, "Ava, I loved you until you became someone I couldn't recognize. So I decided that no one would ever get close enough again to tell me that." Jack didn't move, but his voice when it came was gentle. "Maybe he didn't recognize you because he never really looked." Ava's breath caught. They stood in silence, the hum of vending machines, the soft scribble of crayon, the sound of two people quietly breaking open after years of silence. Finally, she spoke. "He thinks you're a superhero, you know," she said, nodding toward Micah. Jack glanced at his son. "He's wrong." "No," Ava said firmly. "He's not." Later that night, Ava found herself outside again on the rooftop where everything had started. The city glowed beneath her. The air was cool, clean still. She walked to the helicopter pad and sat on the edge of the platform legs dangling slightly over the concrete. She thought about the boy who drew wings, about the man who once wore them, and about the version of herself who had almost forgotten how to feel. She looked up at the stars, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. "The board has called an emergency session." Ava didn't even look up from her desk. "What's the excuse this time?" Her assistant, Jordan, shifted nervously near the door. "They said it's about corporate liability. The incident on the roof. You letting a janitor fly company property." Ava's pen paused mid-signature. "Are they questioning the deal with Helix Gyno?" That closed beautifully. "Then they're not worried about the helicopter," she said coldly. "They're worried about me." Jordan didn't answer. He didn't have to. Ava stood smoothing the fabric of her black blazer. Her reflection in the glass wall with sharp shoulders, squared jaw set every inch the woman who had climbed her way into the C-suite and earned her name on the door. But this time something beneath the armor burned. Because this wasn't about policy. This was about politics. And the man behind it had been circling her like a vulture for years. Miles Huxley was already seated at the head of the conference table when she walked in, flanked by 3 other board members who all looked like they'd been coached an hour too long. The room was cold. Not in temperature, but in tone. Ms. Marlowe Miles said with a smile that never touched his eyes, "Thank you for joining us. We were just reviewing flight risk protocols and asset management." "Is that what we're calling it?" Ava replied smoothly, taking her seat. "We're here," he said, folding his hands because a non-certified, non-licensed employee, one who works in janitorial services, piloted a Silverline Dynamics aircraft without board knowledge or approval. "He also saved a $300 million deal," Ava said calmly. "Would you like to see the footage of the Helix Sky CEO hugging me on the landing pad?" Miles didn't blink. "This isn't about results. It's about risk. About precedent." Ava leaned forward. "You're not here because of protocol. You're here because for the first time in 10 years, you can smell blood in the water." Miles gave a slow, patronizing chuckle. "I'm here because leadership without discipline becomes liability. You gave flight access to a man who mops floors. I gave flight access to a war hero," she snapped. "One with more flight hours than any contractor on our roster." "He's not cleared," Miles said. "He's not listed on company insurance. He doesn't even have a pilot's license in our records. He didn't ask to fly," Ava countered. "He offered. And when no one else could get the job done, he did." She looked around the room, eyes locking with each board member in turn. "And you know what scares you most." It worked. A man without a title did something you weren't brave enough to approve. And it worked. Yeah, that's the part none of you can stomach. The silence was deafening. Miles leaned back. "Well," said he murmured. "But this isn't a speech contest, Ava. It's a vote." He turned to the others. "Motion on the table to revoke Ms. Marlowe's emergency authority on asset deployment pending further internal review." All in favor, hands began to rise. 3, 4, then 5. Ava watched them with icy calm. Cowards, the lot of them. Not one had spoken up when the company was weeks from collapse. Not one had challenged her when she'd fought to keep payroll alive during the pandemic. But now that she'd shown something human, they smelled an opening. Only 2 hands remained down. Ava looked to them both. The first was Marion Fields, the oldest on the board. She'd built satellites in the 80s when men wouldn't let her in the control room. Marion met Ava's eyes, gave a near imperceptible nod, and kept her hand folded in her lap. The other was Noah Delacroix, the newest member, young, brilliant, and still unsure of his place. His eyes darted between Miles and Ava. Conflict flickered behind his glasses. Then, slowly, his hand began to rise. Ava spoke. "Before you vote, let me say one thing." The room paused. "Every one of you sits in that chair today because someone once saw value in you that hadn't been proven yet. Someone looked past a missing credential or a lack of polish and said, 'Yes, I'll take the risk.'" She placed her hand flat on the table. Jack Brennan didn't ask for recognition. He didn't ask for a raise. He didn't even ask for thanks. He just did what needed to be done. And if this board punishes that kind of integrity, then we don't deserve to lead this company. She looked at Noah, dead in the eye, and said softly, "Be the leader you wish you'd had when you were invisible." Noah froze. Then, slowly, very slowly, he lowered his hand. The vote hung. 4-3. Miles's jaw tightened. "We'll table the motion," he said, coolly, voice clipped. "For now." Later that evening, Jack found Ava outside the simulation bay. He was holding a folded letter in one hand. The paper looked aged. Military stationery. "You got a visitor," he said. She looked up, confused. "Who old friend of yours?" he said. "Name's Trent Maxwell." Ava blinked. "He came here?" Jack nodded. "Left this with me." He handed her the letter. She opened it. Inside was a note in Trent's scrawl. "If they ever question the man who flew you to your future, remind them that medals are given by governments. But courage is proven in silence." Ava stared at the words. And for the first time that day she smiled. Not because she'd won, but because someone saw what she saw. That night Micah was in the break room again, sketching. Ava passed by. He held up a new drawing. This time it wasn't just a helicopter. It was a boardroom with a tiny stick figure at the head of the table. Next to it, in neat little letters, "My dad's boss is brave too." Ava crouched beside him. "And what makes her brave?" she asked. Micah grinned. "She doesn't fire people for being awesome." Ava laughed a real one, and as she ruffled his hair she realized something. The boy wasn't just drawing what he saw, he was drawing what he hoped the world could be. And maybe, just maybe, she could help make it true. It started with a cough, just a small one, barely a rasp in the back of Micah's throat. Jack didn't think much of it at first. The boy had always been sensitive to dust and dry air. But by midday the color had drained from his cheeks and he was quieter than usual, even during their lunch break in the maintenance office. By late afternoon, Micah was curled up on a blanket in the back of the janitorial closet, shivering. And Jack knew something was wrong. He knelt beside him, pressed a hand to his forehead. "Burning." "Micah," he said softly. The boy's eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused. Jack's pulse kicked into overdrive. He scooped Micah into his arms and moved fast down the stairwell past the executive offices through the lobby where a few late employees watched with curiosity but didn't ask. By the time he reached the front desk, Ava was stepping out of a meeting room across the hall. Their eyes met, and whatever she was about to say died in her throat. Jack didn't have to explain. She saw everything in his face. "What's happening?" she asked, already crossing to him. "Fever," Jack said. "Fast onset. Breathing's tight. He needs help. I'll call emergency." "No," Jack cut in. "We don't have time to wait. The nearest pediatric hospital's across the river. It's rush hour." Ava's jaw tensed. "The chopper's on the roof." "I know," Jack said. They didn't speak for another second. Then Ava grabbed her access badge. "Let's move." The wind on the rooftop was brutal. Clouds had begun to gather low and fast, gray thunderheads rolling in from the mountains. A storm front. Bad one. But not yet. They had a window. Jack laid Micah carefully in the passenger side, bundled him in his coat. Ava slid into the co-pilot seat beside him, strapping in. "You don't have to come," Jack said. Her reply was instant. "I'm not letting you fly into a storm alone." The engine roared to life. The blades whirred, slicing the thickening sky, and then they lifted. The city unfurled beneath them in a blur of lights and sirens and brake lights, gridlocked chaos stretching for miles. Micah whimpered in the back. Jack adjusted the comms, flicked a switch, fine-tuned the altitude. Ava watched him. This wasn't the quiet, composed flight from days ago. This was something else. Urgency. Precision under pressure. The kind of focus only forged by pain and training. She could hear his breathing in her headset, deep controlled but tight at the edges. "Jack," she said softly. "You okay?" "Not really," he replied, "but I will be when we land." Outside the windshield, the first drops of rain spattered across the glass. 15 minutes in the wind changed. The chopper shuddered just slightly, but enough for Ava to tighten her grip on the edge of her seat. Jack didn't flinch. He adjusted pitch, trimmed throttle, cut under a low air lane, and banked right. Micah let out a soft moan. Ava turned, saw his small hand reaching weakly toward the front. "He's disoriented," she murmured. Jack's voice came through the headset, barely audible. He had RSV once, when he was 2. His lungs never fully recovered. Ava's throat tightened. "What does he need?" "Oxygen. IV fluids. Fast." She looked out the window, only 10 miles left. But the storm was no longer waiting. Lightning split the sky somewhere near the ridge. Air traffic control crackled in Jack's ear, warning of heavy turbulence. "Should we turn back?" Ava asked. Jack's jaw clenched. There's nothing to turn back to. The storm hit like a wall. Winds buffeted the frame rain, slamming sideways. The helicopter lurched, dropped 5 feet, then leveled. Ava's breath caught, but Jack's hands never left the controls. He was calm. Not because it wasn't dangerous, but because danger was a language he understood better than words. Ava watched him, his eyes scanning fingers, adjusting muscles, taut but fluid. He wasn't flying through the storm. He was dancing with it. And suddenly she understood. He didn't stop flying because he feared the sky. He stopped because he feared the crash he couldn't come back from. But this was who he had always been. "Visual on Mercy Hospital," Jack said. "Pads on the East Tower." Ava activated the external beacon. Below, red landing lights bloomed through the rain. "We're almost there," she whispered more to herself than anyone else. As they descended, the crosswinds kicked up hard. Jack leaned into them, corrected with surgical precision. The landing was tense blades howling against the wind, but the skids touched down with perfect control. Ava exhaled a breath she didn't know she was holding. "Jack!" She started, but he was already unbuckling, already reaching for his son. Hospital staff rushed out with a stretcher. Jack carried Micah down himself, refused to hand him over until they were inside the ER bay, and a nurse placed an oxygen mask gently over the boy's face. The attending physician approached. "Good timing," she said. "If you'd arrived 10 minutes later, it could have gotten a lot worse." Jack didn't respond. He just sat beside the bed, holding Micah's hand. Hours passed. Storms moved on. The night deepened, and Ava never left the waiting room. She sat, coat draped over her lap, staring at the floor, her thoughts miles above the city still spinning with rotor blades and raindrops. Finally, Jack stepped out. He looked exhausted, but there was something soft in his expression. "They've stabilized him," he said. "They'll keep him overnight, but he's going to be okay." Ava stood slowly. "Thank God." Jack nodded, then paused. "I'm sorry," he said. She frowned. "For what?" "For dragging you into this. For the risk." "Don't," she interrupted gently. "Don't apologize for being a father." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since they met, she saw it fully. The grief, the grit, the love, the war inside him, and something inside her cracked open. Ava stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You flew into a storm, and you didn't crash. That's not something you apologize for." Jack's eyes flickered. "You didn't leave either," he said. "You sat in the dark waiting for a boy who isn't yours." Ava smiled softly. "Maybe he's not mine yet." Outside the hospital, the storm had passed, but something deeper was still clearing. The sky above Aurora Falls shimmered with the first stars of dawn, and in the silence between them, something unspoken took root. Not just gratitude, not just respect, but something stronger. The beginning of hope. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly in the hospital corridor, casting a sterile glow on polished linoleum. It was past midnight, but time had lost its meaning hours ago. The world outside had gone quiet. No more sirens, no more helicopter blades, no more thunder. Just the hush that follows a storm. Ava Marlowe sat on a cracked vinyl couch in the pediatric wing legs, crossed coat draped over her shoulders like armor she hadn't taken off yet. Across the hall, through a glass panel, she could see Micah asleep in a hospital bed, oxygen cannula in place, tiny chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Beside him sat Jack. He hadn't moved for over an hour, one hand resting lightly on the bed rail, the other holding Micah's small fingers like they were the only thing anchoring him to the earth. Ava watched in silence. There was something sacred in that stillness, something unspeakably tender. He didn't look like a janitor, didn't even look like a soldier. He looked like a man who had built his entire life around one promise. You're not going to go through this alone. And somehow, she felt it too. He came out eventually, slow and quiet, closing the door behind him with the same care someone might use to protect a secret. Ava looked up. Jack didn't speak, just sat beside her. Not too close, but not far either. She turned her head, met his eyes. "You stayed the whole time," he said. "I wasn't going to leave him," she replied. Then, after a pause, "Or you." Jack leaned forward, elbows on his knees, exhaled. "I didn't think you would." There was no accusation in his voice, just wonder. Ava stared at the floor. "I spent most of my life believing I had to earn loyalty by being perfect, that if I showed a crack even for a second, people would walk away." Jack's voice was soft. "Who taught you that?" "My father, and every man who thought I was too much after him." Jack gave a faint nod. "Yeah, I've met those guys." She let out a breath. "Micah is brave," she said. "Like you." Jack looked down at his hands. "He's stronger than I'll ever be." "That's not true." Jack's jaw clenched. "You didn't see me. After Sarah. I was a ghost. I didn't speak for weeks. I sat in an empty apartment listening to a voicemail on loop until I couldn't even hear her voice anymore. Just static." Ava didn't interrupt. "I held my son for the first time with shaking hands. I remember thinking, how am I supposed to keep you alive when I couldn't even keep her safe?" There it was, the wound beneath the silence. She turned toward him, her voice barely audible. "You did keep him alive." Jack met her gaze. "And what about me?" he asked. "Am I just keeping myself busy until it all fades, or am I still here because I might matter again?" Ava's throat tightened. "You flew into a storm, Jack. Not just for your son, for you. You sat in that cockpit and you didn't hesitate. You didn't break." Jack shook his head. "I was terrified, but you didn't stop." He looked away, and Ava reached out gently, placed her hand over his. He stilled. Their hands remained there, unmoving, but something in the air shifted. Something old and fragile and real. "I was engaged once," Ava said. Jack's eyebrows lifted slightly. She nodded. "He was charming, smart. He said all the right things, until the day I became CEO. What happened? He told me he loved the version of me who still needed him." Jack blinked. "I stopped needing him, and he left." Jack's voice was quiet. "Then he never really loved you." She gave a sad smile. "That's what I figured out too late." The silence that followed was heavier than grief, but not heavier than truth. A nurse passed by, nodded politely. Jack stood, stretched his back, walked to the vending machine. "You hungry?" he asked. "I'm fine," Ava said. "You sure this hospital has a gourmet selection of stale granola bars and water bottles from the Eisenhower administration?" She actually laughed. The sound startled her. "I'll take a bottle," she said. He returned with one, tossed it lightly to her. Ava caught it, unscrewed the cap, and took a sip. And for the first time in a very, very long time, she felt grounded, not as a CEO, not as a figurehead, but as Ava. Micah stirred the next morning around 6 a.m., eyes fluttering open with a groggy sigh. Jack was already at his side. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, brushing the boy's hair back. "How you feelin'?" Micah nodded weakly. "Better. You scared us last night." The boy looked over, saw Ava standing near the foot of the bed. His lips curved into a sleepy smile. "You stayed." Ava stepped closer. "Of course I did." Micah blinked slowly. "You're brave." Jack smiled, tears pricking his eyes. "So is your dad," Ava added. Micah didn't hesitate. "My dad's the best pilot in the whole world." Jack looked away. Ava placed a hand on his shoulder. "No." "Micah," she said gently, "your dad's not the best pilot in the world." Jack frowned, slightly surprised. She crouched beside the bed, looked the boy in the eyes. "He's the best man in the world." Flying's just something he does." Jack couldn't speak. Micah beamed, and Ava didn't want to leave that room. They sat together for an hour before the doctors came in. Paperwork, follow-ups, monitoring. Micah would be discharged by evening. When Ava finally stood to leave, Jack followed her to the hallway. "You don't have to go," he said quietly. She smiled. "Yes, I do, but only because I have a board meeting at 9 and I want to walk into it still wearing this hospital bracelet as a reminder that some things, some people, are more important than signatures." Jack chuckled. "They're going to hate that." "Let them," she said. Then she turned, but just before stepping into the elevator, she looked back. And Jack. "Yeah, don't disappear again. Not from your story, not from mine." The elevator doors slid closed, and for the first time in 3 years, Jack Brennan allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, his story wasn't finished. The invitation came in a cream-colored envelope with embossed lettering slipped beneath the janitor's closet door like a message from another life. Jack opened it with calloused hands, brow furrowed. "Skytide Innovation Summit, VIP Exhibition Flight Request." He read it 3 times before he believed it was real. In smaller print, it added, "As a tribute to resilience and unsung service, we invite Jack Brennan to perform a solo helicopter demonstration over Aurora Falls." In recognition of his story, a private scholarship for his son Micah will be provided by the Skytide Foundation. Jack sat down hard on a storage crate letter, trembling in his grip. His first instinct was to crumple it, toss it, hide it beneath the weight of mop handles and floor wax and the 1,000 quiet ways he stayed invisible. But Micah's laughter from down the hall stopped him cold. Ava's voice followed, soft and clear. "Careful with that, Captain. The paper airplane has to actually fly." Later that evening, Jack stood in the break room still holding the letter. Ava entered without knocking. "You got it," she said simply. He didn't answer. She crossed her arms, leaning against the doorway. "You're not going to accept, are you?" Jack looked at her. "Do you know what happens when you get into a cockpit after 3 years of telling yourself you're done? When your hands remember, but your heart still doubts." Ava stepped closer. "No, I don't know that, but I do know what it's like to walk into a boardroom where everyone expects you to fail just because you dared to lead." He met her eyes. "Then you know why I can't. You mean why you won't." His jaw clenched. She lowered her voice. "Jack, you didn't just fly that storm for Micah. You didn't do it for me or to prove a point. You did it because you still can, because deep down, you want to." He shook his head. "I'm not that guy anymore." Ava moved to the window looking out over the dusk-lit city. "Micah thinks you are." Jack looked down. "Micah believes a lot of things. He believes in you." She turned. "And so do I." He stared at her, unsure of what to say, so she whispered, "You flew for a nation. Now fly for one little boy." Silence wrapped the room. Then Jack exhaled. "If I do this, if I fly—" She waited. "I want you there." Ava's expression didn't change, just deepened. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." The morning of the flight arrived with a sky so clear it felt choreographed. The airfield buzzed with quiet anticipation. Reporters, investors, tech engineers, and families lined the bleachers with coffee cups in hand, kids on shoulders. Skytide banners waved against the wind. Camera crews positioned their rigs. And in the hangar, Jack stood next to the helicopter, his hands on the fuselage like a man greeting an old friend at a gravesite. Micah ran up in his tiny aviator jacket, sunglasses, slightly oversized. "You look like a real pilot, Dad." Jack smiled, kneeling. "I'm just someone who remembers how to try." Micah looked up at the crowd. "Are you nervous?" Jack nodded. "Yeah, but brave people do things even when they're scared." Micah considered this. "Then you're the bravest person here." Jack swallowed the lump in his throat and pulled his son into a hug. From the bleachers, Ava watched, dressed in a clean-cut navy coat, wind in her hair, a private smile on her lips. Behind her, Miles Huxley scrolled his phone furiously, speaking to a reporter. "You're about to witness a PR disaster," he hissed. A janitor turned stunt pilot. "Wait until the engine stalls." The reporter raised an eyebrow. "That's a little cold." Miles scoffed. "So is reality." Jack climbed into the cockpit. His hands didn't shake. Not anymore. The helmet slid on like it had never left him. Switches, gauges, pressure, fuel, memory. The blades began to spin. The hum built into a roar. The crowd silenced. Then takeoff. The helicopter rose into the morning light like a phoenix born not from fire, but from grace. Jack moved with elegant control, sweeping into a steady arc, the machine obeying as if it remembered him too. Every dip, every climb, every pivot. A dance between man and sky. On the ground, Micah jumped and cheered. "That's my dad." In the VIP tent, a live feed projected Jack's flight across a massive screen. Miles leaned in, whispering to a board member. "He'll over-correct the tailspin." "Watch." But he didn't. Instead, Jack performed a perfect aerial spiral, then hovered midair, nose pointed to the sun like a salute. The crowd erupted. Ava didn't cheer. She just closed her eyes for a moment, one hand on her chest. Pride wasn't loud. It was sacred. The landing was flawless. Jack touched down like he was settling into peace. When he stepped out, the applause didn't stop. He didn't wave, didn't bow, just walked straight to his son. Micah ran to him, leaping into his arms. "You did it." Jack held him tight. "We did." Later, amid the chatter and celebration, Ava found him near the food trucks, sipping a cup of black coffee like nothing had happened. She walked up beside him. He didn't turn. "You still afraid of flying?" he asked. She smirked. "Only when I'm not in the cockpit." Jack looked at her. "Funny. That's exactly when I feel safest." They stood there side by side. No rush, no pressure. Just two souls who had seen each other clearly, finally without armor. Then Ava handed him a letter. Jack raised an eyebrow. "It's from my father," she said. Jack opened it. "You were right. Being invisible is worse than failing. I see you now. And I'm proud." Jack folded the letter, his fingers careful. Ava added, "He watched the flight. Called me after. Said he wants to meet Micah." Jack's voice cracked. "You deserve that." She turned to him. "And so do you." He looked away. "I don't know what comes next." Her eyes softened. "I think maybe we write the next chapter together." Jack looked at her. "You mean in a book, or I mean in the sky?" The airfield hadn't seen this many people since the grand opening of Silverline's first aircraft hangar. But this was different. This wasn't about polished machines or ribbon cuttings. This was about something raw, something human. A story that had quietly taken flight, and now everyone had gathered to watch it soar. Jack stood beside the helicopter, his old boots dusted with gravel, his flight suit zipped halfway, hands clenched and eyes steady. Micah was by the bleachers, waving a small homemade flag that read, "Fly, Dad, Fly," with hand-drawn wings and stars. His aviator glasses sat slightly crooked, but he looked like the proudest kid on earth. Ava stood in the command tent, flanked by Investors Media and Silverline staff. Her expression was unreadable, elegant, composed, but her fingers kept curling into her coat sleeve. A single nod from Jack. Engines roared to life. In the shadows behind the bleachers, Miles Huxley leaned over to a journalist. "Let me tell you something," he said, voice low and poisonous. "This man is a janitor with a history of trauma. You really want your viewers trusting him with aircraft. What if he blacks out mid-flight?" The journalist blinked. "What if he doesn't?" Miles scoffed. PR disasters don't come with parachutes. The helicopter lifted blades, slicing the air like declarations. Jack's ascent was smooth-controlled, but not flashy. He wasn't performing. He was communicating. With every curve, every shift in elevation, he told a story. Of second chances. Of not needing to be seen to matter. Of choosing flight after years of hiding. Ava watched the live telemetry screen as Jack took the chopper into a figure-8 maneuver, then a slow bank over the far hilltops, dipping low enough that the treetops shimmered in the rotor wash. Micah screamed from below, "That's my dad." And the entire crowd turned to look not at the sky, but at the little boy on the ground, beaming with pride. Suddenly, it wasn't about the flight anymore. It was about legacy. Inside the tent, a producer tapped Ava on the shoulder. "There's something you should see." He handed her a tablet. On screen, a breaking news segment titled, "From Janitor to Pilot Redemption or Recklessness." Ava's eyes narrowed. She scrolled down. Photos of Jack mopping floors. A grainy image from his military record. A cruel quote attributed anonymously, "Some men belong in the sky. Some belong in closets with buckets." Her jaw tightened. "Miles," she said without turning. He looked up from his phone, faux innocent. You leaked this." He shrugged. Truth has a funny way of resurfacing. Ava stepped toward him, slow and deliberate. "You know what I see when I look at Jack?" Miles rolled his eyes. "I see a man who didn't let grief make him cruel, who chose love over legacy, who flies not to impress but to heal." "You see a story," Miles sneered. "I see a liability." "No," she said quietly. "You see a threat. That's not the same thing." Then she turned to the crowd and walked away from Miles forever. Above, Jack began his final sequence. He brought the helicopter into a tight spiral ascent, then paused mid-air, hovering like a question mark against the sky. A beat of silence. Then he dipped forward and performed a maneuver most pilots wouldn't dare in front of a crowd, the half-loop. But he didn't do it to show off. He did it to prove to himself he could still rise and fall with grace. The blades howled. The crowd held its breath. And he pulled it off with surgical precision, touching back down on the airstrip like the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. When the rotors slowed, Jack stepped out. Sweat on his brow. Heart thundering. He didn't raise his arms, didn't wait for applause. He just scanned the crowd for one face. Micah ran to him first, almost knocking him off balance. "You flew like a superhero." Jack laughed and crouched, scooping him up. "I flew like your dad. That's even better." From behind, Ava's voice floated over the noise. "Captain Brennan." He turned. She stood a few paces away, holding something in her hand, a simple silver pin shaped like wings. "This was my father's," she said, voice steadier than she felt. "He earned it, but he never wore it. Said it reminded him of what he gave up chasing the sky." She stepped forward and pinned it gently to Jack's chest. "I think it belongs to someone who never stopped flying even when he was grounded." Jack blinked, throat thick. "Thank you," he murmured. Then a whisper from Micah. "Can we keep flying?" Together, Jack smiled at Ava. Her answer was soft, certain. "The sky belongs to you now." The airfield erupted in applause, not for the pilot, but for the man who remembered how to fly, and for the people who believed in him before the rest of the world caught on. The rooftop looked different now. It wasn't the rusted helipad, the faded safety stripes, or even the blinking beacon light overhead that marked the building as Silverline's crown jewel. It was the quiet. The kind of quiet that only follows storms, the kind that wraps around you like a blanket. Not emptiness, but stillness. Ava Marlowe stood there alone, arms crossed over a simple wool coat. The wind tugged gently at the ends of her hair as she looked out over Aurora Falls, where the sun had just begun to dip behind the pine-covered hills, casting the city in a golden hush. Behind her, the sound of slow, measured footsteps on the rooftop gravel. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. "I thought you hated goodbyes," she said softly. Jack Brennan chuckled under his breath as he stepped beside her, a rag in his hand, wiping down the helicopter's exterior with quiet focus. "I'm not here to say goodbye," he said, voice low and sure. "Just here to make sure the bird's clean for tomorrow." Ava glanced at him. "You're staying?" It wasn't a question. Jack met her gaze, and something in his eyes no longer hidden, no longer haunted, answered everything. Micah asked me this morning if he could build a paper plane to take to school, he said. Said he wanted to show his friends what hope looks like. Ava smiled, her throat tightening. I guess I'm staying, Jack added, at least until that paper plane takes off. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was filled with memory, with everything they'd said and even more that they hadn't. I wasn't joking anymore, Ava said finally, her voice trembling. That day, when I told you to fly this bird and I'll marry you. I didn't mean it then, but I do now. Jack's eyes softened, his features suddenly fragile in the fading light. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. No grand gesture, no crowd, no stage. Just them. He opened it. Inside, a simple silver ring etched with 2 wings folded into each other. I used to fly for my country, he said, voice thick with emotion. Then I flew for my son. But now, I want to fly for you, too. Ava's hand went to her lips. I don't need grand, she whispered. I don't even need perfect. I just need real. Jack took her hand and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit like it had always belonged there. They stood still for a moment, letting it sink in, not the proposal, but what it meant. That 2 broken people had found each other not despite their wounds, but because of them. From below, the rooftop door creaked open. Micah popped his head through cheeks flushed still in his school jacket. Are you guys coming, or what he called out, holding a paper plane in one hand and a bag of marshmallows in the other? Mom, Ava, the cocoa's getting cold. Ava laughed, wiping at her eyes. Jack turned to the boy. We'll be right down, Captain. Micah grinned and disappeared with a thud, thud, thud down the stairs. Jack looked at her. He's been calling you Mom in his sleep, you know. Ava blinked. That okay with you? Jack asked. She didn't answer. She just smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder. Yeah, she said. Yeah, that's more than okay. Later that night, inside their small apartment above the hangar, Jack, Ava, and Micah sat around a cluttered table littered with cocoa mugs, sticky marshmallows, and half-finished crayon drawings. On the fridge, a new one, was pinned a picture of a helicopter in the sky with 3 stick figures holding hands in the cabin. Above it, a title, Us. Ava reached over and ran her fingers through Micah's hair. So what should our call sign be? Micah, eyes wide, thought for a second. Team Featherstorm, he said, dead serious. Jack raised an eyebrow. Featherstorm. It's soft and powerful, Micah said matter-of-factly. Like her cocoa. Like you're flying. Like our family. They all burst out laughing. But it stayed. The name. The moment. Because it wasn't about building a new life. It was about choosing one together. Somewhere far off, the world kept spinning. There were still board meetings, deadlines, headlines. There were still storms both in the sky and in the heart. But on that rooftop, on that night, under stars that had witnessed war loss and longing, a janitor turned pilot, a CEO turned believer, and a little boy who drew hope in crayons had found their flight path. And this time they weren't running from anything. They were flying home. Sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who carry us when everything else falls apart. And sometimes, healing doesn't come with noise. It comes quietly like the steady hum of a helicopter cutting through doubt. If you've ever met someone who changed your life when you least expected it, or if you've ever been that quiet hero in someone else's story, we'd love to hear it. Share your story in the comments. Whether it was a janitor, a nurse, a teacher, a stranger at a gas station. If someone gave you hope when you were falling, your story might give someone else the strength to rise. Also, tell us where in the world are you watching from. It's incredible how stories connect hearts across oceans, time zones, and cultures. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that heal, inspire, and remind us that love, dignity, and second chances still matter. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a story that might just change your day or your life. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, fly steady. love deeper, and never forget. Sometimes the quietest souls have the loudest wings.